Morning, I'm Sean with Gertens. I'm the manager of the nursery department here, and we're joining you today to talk a little bit about tree care and evergreen care under these drought conditions. So I think we're going to go ahead and start with a question about how much water does need to be happening right now. It's going to vary a little bit depending on if it's a newly planted tree or an existing tree. If we're talking a newly planted tree, planted this season, last season even, you're going to want to water probably every other day right now under these conditions. The amount that you're going to water is going to vary a little bit depending on the size of the tree. A good rule of thumb, or our general instruction, I guess, for watering has always been to go for about 20 minutes, hose on a really slow trickle right at the base of the trunk. Under normal conditions, we'd recommend doing that every 3 to 4 days. Like I said, under these conditions, you're going to probably want to be doing it every other day, even bumping it up to maybe a half hour. The reason that you want that slow trickle is you want that slow release of water to actually soak into the ground. It'll then not just run off, it'll actually feed the tree, but B, it'll help draw those trees' roots deeper into the soil and help it get really rooted in and established for future seasons. Older trees, it's going to be a different approach. You're not going to want to use a hose, you're not going to want to use a soaker hose or anything like that. You're actually going to want to use a sprinkler, and you're going to not want it at the base of the trunk, but actually out at the drip line of the trunk, or of the tree, sorry. So the drip line is where the canopy kind of ends. You can imagine all the water running off the leaves and dripping down to the ground. So that's about the extent of those root systems, those feeder roots. They have little fine root hairs on them. That's where they're going to draw in most of that water. So you're going to want to water out in that area about a gallon a week, I'd say. About an inch worth of water a week. I know an inch is a little bit hard to calculate. So if you're watering maybe 2 to 3 times a week, following that same kind of every other day schedule, I'd say probably a half hour to 45 minutes with a sprinkler should be right about there. And then what I've just told you about the trees, same goes for the evergreens. And then on top of watering, any mulching that you can do around the tree itself will help retain that moisture for longer. So a good 3-inch layer of mulch around the tree, leaving about a 3 to 4 inch gap right around the trunk, will also aid in the tree's survivability.
What do our stressed trees look like? How do we know they're stressed?
How do we know they're stressed? So it's going to vary a little bit depending on the variety, but or I should say it can show itself in kind of multiple ways. Change of color in leaves at this point in the season is a good indicator that it's under stress. Trees that normally don't produce seeds that are producing seeds, or that have been, sorry, I'm going to restate that. Trees that have been bred to be seedless that are now producing seeds, that's a good indication that the tree is under stress. And then trees that normally produce seeds, if they're producing more seeds, again, is a good sign of stress. Wilting of leaves can be an indicator of not enough water as well. So maybe the wilting of leaves is probably a good early indicator. The changing color of leaves is a real indicator that it's under some stress.
So we have a viewer asking, how do we know when our evergreens are stressed from the lack of water? You might have already.
It's kind of similar to the deciduous trees, just the change in color in the needles. If there is a branch that, or a branch or two that have gone brown, that's maybe it's probably an indication of stress, but it may be an indication of some other stuff going on. But generally, browning of needles kind of throughout the evergreen would be the indication.
And what about pruning? If they're brown, do we need to prune those out?
So, at this point in the season, I would recommend against any sort of pruning, whether it's a deciduous tree or an evergreen, especially with the evergreens, just because pruning generally will promote some new growth, any of that new growth that's occurring now is just going to end up getting killed off over the winter anyways. So while if it's an evergreen and it's got some brown spots in there, it may not be the prettiest thing through the winter, I would recommend holding off until late winter or next spring to prune those. With deciduous trees, same thing. I would really recommend just holding off and waiting. If there's a broken branch or something like that, certainly you can go ahead and prune that out. But if we're just talking about a branch that's potentially dead, I'd wait. I'd hold off on pruning.
So you might have answered this, but how is the drought going to affect my evergreens going into winter?
Well, so evergreens, while deciduous trees obviously lose all their leaves in the fall and winter, evergreens hold on to their needles, and that's essentially their leaves. They have a tendency, they can dry out over the winter if the evergreen isn't well watered, going into that freeze. So for both evergreens, deciduous trees, especially newly planted, you're going to want to water all the way up until the ground actually freezes. Not just when we get that first frost, but when the ground actually freezes. That warmer soil, that moist soil holds its heat a little bit longer, and so it helps ease that freezing of the root ball, but then also just ensuring that it has enough water so that it's not going to be too thirsty through the winter when there's no water kind of entering the ground.
So a viewer's asking, my maple tree has a ton of seeds right now. Is that normal?
Mm-hmm. It depends on the maple tree. So the flame emmer maple, which is now considered invasive and we're not able to sell, but it is all over the Twin Cities. Those right now, you will notice that they have immense bunches of seeds. That is that's their normal. That's how they normally look at this point of the season, I guess is the best way to say that. Again, some maples that have been bred to not have seeds, the Autumn Blaze, the Sienna Glen, anything in that Acer Fremani family, if those trees are showing seeds, that's a sign of stress. Even though they've been bred to not have seeds, still in their DNA, they know that to reproduce, they have to produce seeds. And so it's just really a defense mechanism or a survivability mechanism where if they're under enough stress, whether it's a lack of water or the heat, the drought we're having, that can cause them to create seeds just kind of as a defense mechanism. Given a season or two, it should go back to being seedless. Same could be said for other trees that normally have seeds. If there are more than you usually see, it's the tree's own kind of survivability instinct kicking in to try and do what it can to repropagate.
You might have already said this, but with all the rain we just had, are the trees okay now?
No. Short answer is no. Yes, you don't have to go out and water today or tomorrow probably, or even this weekend just with the rain we've had this week. However, we are in a significant deficit going back to last November. So any water that we're getting now through rain is just playing catch up. So really don't just say, okay, we've got our rain, done. You really want to keep up with that watering, like I said, all the way through until the ground freezes.
So another question, I guess, is what effect will this drought have on our plants next year?
It's a good question. I guess I don't have a really good answer for that. The drought going through, like I said, from last November through now, it's going to affect the survivability of some of the plants. It's just a kind of a reality that there are some that just aren't going to make it through, and that could be despite all of your good practices in terms of watering and mulching and all those kind of things. Sometimes just plants just say, I've had enough. So
what about fertilizer? Should I fertilize?
No, for two reasons. If your plant is already under stress, if it's showing signs of stress, adding fertilizer into that will kind of be like throwing fuel onto a fire. It'll just kind of exasperate it more. So if your plant, whether it's tree, shrub, evergreen, whatever, is already under stress or already showing signs of stress, really just watering at this point is all you're going to be wanting to do. If the tree isn't showing signs of stress, our recommendation really, regardless of what's happening with the weather, is that after August 1st, it's kind of the cutoff for fertilizer. Again, with deciduous trees and stuff like that, they're going to start going into dormancy soon, so you really don't want to do anything to kickstart anything and get things going. Same with the evergreens. So,
I've heard that fall is a good time to plant trees.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that, and how does this drought affect the planting process?
Sure. So I'll address the second part first. The drought affecting the planting process is really just more of a matter of you really just have to be diligent about the watering. And again, like I said, our normal recommendations would be every 3 to 4 days. Under these conditions, going every day, or I'm sorry, every other day. Even in that first week, you might want to go every day, just to really make sure it's getting all the water it needs to get established. First part of the question, planting trees now at this time of the year. Yeah, deciduous trees love it. They still get the warmer day temperatures. The soil is still nice and warm, but those night temperatures are much cooler, and so it's not kind of causing that constant stress on it. So it's a really good time to be planting.
So my lilac has brown spots all over the leaves. Could that be blight or drought stress?
So it depends on what those brown spots actually look like. We haven't seen it so much this summer. Last summer, there was a lilac blight that ran rampant through the Twin Cities. It was a bacterial blight. People from all over the cities were calling us constantly or coming in constantly looking for advice and all of that. So there's a chance it might be a blight. Generally speaking, brown spots are not a sign of drought stress. You'll usually see an entire leaf go yellow or go brown rather than just kind of spotting on it. So more than likely it's the blight.
So you might have gone through this again, but like, what would you say is the best method of watering trees? Just go through that again.
Yeah, for sure. So for me, you know, if it's my tree in my yard, I'm just going to use my hose, like I said, on a really slow trickle. Again, that's for newly planted, younger trees, where you're going to want to have that water right at the base, right at the root ball, and really getting that root ball going and established. Soaker hoses definitely can be used in those situations as well. If you do use a soaker hose, you'll want to go for just a little bit longer. Just overhead irrigation or sprinklers is not going to be enough for a newly planted tree. Again, those older established trees, using an overhead sprinkler, your lawn's irrigation system should be sufficient. You just want to make sure it's running often enough. And again, really kind of focused on that drip line. Yeah.
You also might have gone through this one, but how do I know if my trees are stressed?
Yeah, so again, it's going to be that yellowing of the leaves. It's going to be that wilting of the leaves. It's going to be change of color, right? I just walked through our lot and I saw some of the maples. There's some red starting to appear on some of them. So that's another indication of stress, that the tree is just starting to go into dormancy a little bit earlier than normal. Okay. So that's all I got for time for today. Thanks for joining us. We will be doing another Facebook Live, or I'll probably later in September, early October, about care of evergreens and trees going into the winter. So thanks for joining us.